What's up YouTube, and welcome back to Homebrew Subaru. In this episode I'm going to put a bunch of wiring into the car and I'm going to get my audio system installed. So what's up everyone? This week I wanted to really concentrate on getting the wiring finished so I can get the rest of the interior done. And in order to do that, I really have to think about my audio system. Now the car did come with a single DIN Alpine head unit, but I really want to use this 10-inch touchscreen that I had in the RS. The only real issue with this thing was the output from it. It just wasn't loud enough, so I made the decision to get a cheap amp and some cheap door speakers off Amazon. I know Pyle was a name back in the day. I don't know how big they are anymore. But they are three-way speakers, a 400 watt, 4-channel amp, sending 100 watts to every door. It should sound pretty good, I think, anyway. And along with this stuff, I'm likely going to install the 12-inch sub that I've had in the trunk of most of my cars, just because I've got nowhere else to put it, and I might as well be using the thing. It doesn't take up a ton of space, and it sounds pretty good when it's in there. I need to bring all the channel circuits down from the head unit to the amp because I'm going to be using the RCAs strictly for the sub, so I have some sub control, and just kind of get this all dialed in setting wise afterwards to make sure that I can get it sounding as good as I can. So a bunch of the wiring has to come down from the head unit to the amp, back from the amp out to the doors. The factory door speaker wire, I am going to end up using it. And well, I'll show you why. Having a look at the hinge side of the door, you can see the accordion coming through here for the wiring. I mean, it starts all the way down here and comes up all the way here. There is no way I'm going to attempt to fish wiring through there. Now the speakers are 4 ohm, and at 100 watts with the OEM gauged wiring that's in the car, I think it's going to be sufficient enough from what I've read in the charts. It's just basically attaching from the amplifier up to the factory speaker wiring in behind the head unit, trying to keep things clean enough so it's not like a rat's nest in behind there. The other thing is the two front doors both have tweeters with little modules that come off of the factory wiring to, you know, kind of break down the amount of power that's going to them. The little brackets and everything that hold them on just rattle and they're all loose, so I'm pretty sure all that stuff's coming off. But let me kind of do some unboxing first. So this is a very budget friendly setup. The amp was probably about $70 or $80, and I think I spent another $120 or $130 on the speakers. This is a marine amp, but it really doesn't matter. All that really does for it is make it a little bit more waterproof. Not that it matters sitting in the car. I'm pretty sure it's going to sit underneath the passenger seat and tuck under there just perfect. So I've just removed the front door speakers and pulled back the insulation or the windbreaker here just to kind of see what's going on. So obviously there's this little high pass crossover in here sending power down to the woofer on the door, and then another line kind of twisted up through here that was this little tweeter mounted somewhere like here. And I mean, it might work, and I think I might actually try and wire these things in just to test them out. And then you can see with the new handle surrounds, the tweeter location is pretty much in the same spot that they had it mounted, so I may try and organize that. But they've done some really strange wire connections here. It looks like there's morettes holding everything together. So I think it's just a matter of cutting a bunch of this stuff out, taking some of the length out of it, and soldering all the connections back up. Gonna need to put some new leads down here on this end because they're all kind of rusted up, and I've got new leads with the new speakers anyway. So except this wiring that came with the replacement speakers is just so thin. It's like 22 gauge or something like that. It's so thin, it's hair thin. So I've decided to lop the connectors off, or the little terminals, because I do need them. I don't have anything that's like them, and solder them onto some 16 gauge. I'm sure you may have seen one of these little contraptions before with the magnifier and the 2 alligator clips. This is something my mother got me many years ago. I don't regularly use it, but for a little job like this, like to retain the wiring in here, if I can do it with one hand, and then the terminal in the other end, it won't absorb the heat like a full-size vise will, and just allows you to make a really good connection. So now I can just use this little piece and hook it up to the high-pass crossover, and I'll have good solid connections going to the front woofers. Now the tweeter was being held onto this bracket with this tiny little wood screw that was kind of force threaded in there, and there was wiring wrapped around it as a little washer to try and hold everything tight. But as you can see, there's nothing really to attach to there, and I've just decided to replace them. So I've ordered some Alpines. They should be here in a few days, and they have something with like a backing that attaches to the tweeters, so I can attach the backing directly to the bracket and then snap the tweeter into it, and I think that'll work much better. I have all of the old components pulled out, so 2 front mismatched woofers, the OEM rear speakers, and a bunch of excess wiring and the tweeters that were just jingling around in there. I'm ready to move forward and start mounting the new speakers. They actually give you these little speed clips and some hardware. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make these work, or there is already holes in the door that line up for at least this front speaker I noticed. The new ones do come with templates, but I don't generally bother needing those in most situations on Subarus anyway. I have all of the wiring done in the doors, so some of it's been shortened, some of it's been lengthened, but all of the connections are solder and shrink tube. It's a passenger side door all finished, and I've got the rear door done. I haven't actually sit that 5 1/4 speaker in there yet, but I'm about to start mounting speakers next. I have all of the speakers mounted in the doors. The rear speakers a little tight going into those pockets, and they don't sit very flush, but they are sitting nice and straight. I've started wiring the inputs. Actually, I've finished all the inputs for the amp. Everything coming down from the head unit's connector has all been connected, and I've got the wiring kind of running down and along the carpet, down out a hole right here. Starting to wire the outputs, which are on this side, going to all the speakers, and then I've got to think about some power and ground, and I should be done at the bottom end of it, and then just continue on and finish wiring up the head unit. As you can see, I've got the amp wired in. The only circuit that is left is some battery power. It's actually going towards the trunk because the battery is going to be relocated to the trunk. Up here in the front, I've got everything all in there. The connector for the head unit's ready to go. Some USB cables routed through that come down near the ashtray here. I've placed the ground over on here and fastened the radio ground to it. So I'm just kind of ready to route some RCA cables that were already in the car, but they were routed along this side, and I want to put them along the center console, kind of with the battery wiring going to the front. So let me just kind of show you what the trunk looks like. Someone already had this piece of plywood cut and placed in the trunk. I'm going to reuse it so that I can fasten like the sub and battery box down to it. And the reason the spare tire was probably still in here is someone couldn't get it out. I had to turn and crank on that handle with those channel locks for like 5 minutes until it finally snapped off. Now, someone had also previously installed this monster 4-gauge cable for some kind of amp that was back here at some point. I'm actually going to reuse the ground as a chassis ground, but I've got to move it over to that side. I'm going to have the battery over on that side, and I think the sub over on this side. And well, let me show you the condition of the sub. Now, no word of a lie, I bought 2 of these Kenwood 12-inch subs like over 20 years ago, and I still have the one. I had both of them in a bandpass box, and cars when I was a younger man. And eventually I just reused the one in this one single box that I got it. I think I got it at Future Shop probably like 15 years ago. And I've just blown all the dust off of it to try and clean it up a little bit. On the back side, it's an old Alpine amp. I believe this guy is 300 watts. And I've just been basically running it single channel for the sub. And then because I was having, when the sub would hit hard, I would have like dimming lights and stuff, so I ended up putting a capacitor on it. This was just a cheap Walmart capacitor, and I'm pretty sure it's still going to work. I'm just going to clean up these connections and probably put some new wire on there. And the same with the speaker wire, I'll go ahead and replace that. So it's a few days later. I've managed to clean up the entire speaker box as best I could. I've added some new cable, and these are basically the yellow crimp style ring terminals, and I just took off the insulation, opened up the ears, sat in my cable, crimped it up a little bit, and soldered it all together. So those will be some really good connections. I just got to tape them up and make some additional wire to come off the capacitor to go over to the battery. Throw in a inline fuse in somewhere there. The battery cables, I've started on those. I literally just have this last one to solder up. So I've been using this thick solder, heating up the terminal with a bit of flux in it, adding some flux to the end of the cable, and getting a really good pour of solder down into the joint just to make sure it's nice and solid, a lot like that one is there. I decided to get rid of the grill and just point the speaker at the rear seat. Took off that plate and painted it up because it had a little bit of rust building up on the bottom of it. And I also got these Alpine tweeters to put in. They just arrived in the mail yesterday, so hopefully I can get those wired up to the high pass crossover and make them work good. Over here, first the battery cables. This is the original 4-gauge cable that I had running in the Impreza Outback Sport Wagon, and I was actually using the chassis as my ground. I've decided to go with 2-gauge to run to the front of the car from the battery and have it on the breaker, and then use the 4-gauge directly from the ground of the battery up to the block. And then I'm also going to be grounding the chassis. And the cables happen to be sitting on the carpet that lies in the trunk. I did go to take this to the power washers and just hit it with the high pressure spray. Lots of soap, and as you can see, it didn't really do anything with the staining. So I decided, well, I'll just throw it in my laundry machine because, you know, it was power washed. And coming out of the dryer, I mean, this thing, it smells like a freshly washed blanket. So I'm just going to finish up soldering up some cable ends, and then I'll start laying everything into the car. So as you can see and hear, I have some music playing. I've got the sub sitting in there, the battery's all in there and fastened up on the breaker. And I've got some power going out to the amps, but I don't have the remote turned on for the sub yet. The remote on the head unit actually wasn't turning on. So I needed to do a little rewire at the back of the head unit and just basically splice the remote wire over to the accessory so that the amp will turn on with the key. The sub amp, I'm actually planning on putting a switch in the center console somewhere so I can actually switch it on and off. But I'm gonna start setting this thing up. This is basically sound directly off of the head unit. The gains on the amp aren't even turned up yet. So let me play with it a little bit and we'll see what kind of sound we can get going. So I've taken quite a while to adjust all the settings in the gains, front and rear, and the sub. I think I have it where I want it, just before distortion starts to take over. It gets pretty loud. It's the camera, the mic on the camera is just gonna get flooded, obviously. And I mean, just halfway, it starts getting pretty loud. And just for temporary, I'm gonna give the remote some power. Turn on the sub. That's still only halfway. And the highs and the doors just break right through the sub. It sounds really good. Now that audio setup is way more involved than anything I've had set up in any of my cars before. Usually I just ran a good running head unit, powered door speakers from that, and a sub in the trunk. Using the second amp to power all the doors has really created a lot of sound. And then those high pass crossovers for the tweeters up on the front doors, there's just the full range of sound. You get everything high, and then the sub kicks in and it's got all the lows. It's a really good sounding system for what it is. I'm very happy with it. And aside from having all the audio stuff wired in, the starting and charging system is done as well, so the battery relocated into the trunk and all the wiring run to the front. It just basically means that I'm ready to clean up everything and start installing in the interior. So if you liked this video, definitely give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here and you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button for me. Leave your questions and comments further down below, and I'll see you in the next one.